In this video, I will outline the principles of Hermeticism, namely the 7 principles which govern reality and everything within it. Firstly, however, I will attempt to explain Hermeticism for those who are unfamiliar with the term or its teachings and practices, as well as any tangentially linked topics. Hermeticism predates all religions and scientific practices, dating back to Sumeria, Egypt, and potentially even Atlantis. I say potentially due to the fact that we as a species are still unsure as to whether or not Atlantis ever truly existed, though I will discuss this and any proposed theories regarding it at a later point in time. It should be noted that Hermeticists do not believe in a divine being, but instead divine principles. My personal disdain for the 3 categories to which people predominantly ally themselves, i.e. theist, atheist and agnostic, is due to the fact that these appear to be foolish terms, as I shall briefly explain. Theists believe in a being that created everything, whilst atheists deny any divine intervention at all, both cases seeming rather pointless, as neither category usually contain individuals that provide a glowing endorsement for their respective choice, and certainly do not seem trustworthy enough regarding credibility due to throwing such certainty into the mix. Whilst theists have continually created wars in the name of their so-called God, or Allah, or whichever name they attribute, the atheists have taken a rather nihilistic approach to the subject of where we come from, enclosing themselves in a barrier of ignorance, in which they utilise arguments derived from scientific discovery. The bitter irony being that the majority of atheists are not scientists, and simply regurgitate science as a means to disharmoniously berate the opposition, without truly acknowledging that a Big Bang neither proves nor disproves a supremely divine being. That being said, theists don't typically practice what they preach, whether acting as the bystander to their religion's crimes, or actually having active involvement. Either way, they usually do not follow the moral values entailed within their doctrine. Atheists utilize their position in order to engage in a materialistic approach to life, pontificating that they only have one life, and so it should be in service to themselves. Agnostics, however, usually either cannot pick a side, or they don't care about the source from which we come from enough to bother having an opinion or beliefs or thoughts to back up an argument and simply engage in materialistic consumption. Whilst I generalise in the above, this is based on my own personal experiences, and it should be noted that there are exceptions in all cases for all of these groups. The hidden or occultic truth is that there is a 4th option: Gnosticism. Gnostic comes from the word gnosis, which means knowledge, and herein lies the irony. Agnostics are actually saying that they have no knowledge, which is untrue, as we all have experience of reality and therefore know something. Gnosticism is another name for Hermeticism, so bearing that in mind it becomes apparent that Gnostics or Hermeticists are acknowledging of the fact that they know something, no matter that it does not resolve the question as to the cause of the first cause, but also acknowledging of moral values and separate themselves from the selfish actions of those whom categorise themselves theist or atheist, by taking responsibility for their own actions and inadequacies, and in turn aiming to prove their capability in a wide array of disciplines, whilst following moral values for the greater good, though moral values are irrespective of the law of the land, being more based on natural law. I always did find it funny that Richard Dawkins once got backed into a corner in an interview and ended up having to admit that he classified himself as agnostic, despite the fact that he is actually a very knowledgeable man, though possibly intelligent yet foolish, given his capitulation to a term that makes him sound ignorant regarding the right side of his brain. Hermetic practices primarily can be split into 3 facets, referred to as the tria prima, or 3 primes. These are alchemy, astrology or psychology, and geometry. Though there are prerequisite theoretical understandings which allow the individual to interpret the world from a higher conscious vantage point, it is important to take note of the fact that Hermeticism plays a part in all of the modern day branches of science and the arts: biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics, art and music, medicine, psychology and sociology. Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Napoleon, Socrates, Pythagoras, Aristotle, Plato, Carl Jung, Galileo, and even Jimmy Page, the list goes on. All of these individuals were Hermeticists and brought many of the fundamental principles of science, mathematics, and the arts to the foreground of human consciousness. It is also important to note that Hermeticism predates all of the religions and all the biblical texts, regardless of which religion they are from, as these were wrote by Hermeticists. As such, all of these texts contain the information outlined in this article, but all are written in allegory, resulting in there being a fractal nature to them, resulting in meaning being derived based on the conscious level, if you will, of the individual, and so confusing those who are not yet capable of discerning or perceiving the truths contained therein. Einstein's method for developing his theories on special and general relativity, as well as many of the concepts that are required to fully comprehend said theories, were based on the Hermetic practices. It is no secret that Einstein had developed his logic through the continual study of research papers and human understanding of physics at that time, but it takes something very special to not only advance the understanding of the species, but also to disprove already popular views. I shall not delve into the exact circumstances surrounding Newton and Maxwell's opposing work at this point in time, but it does help in the overall understanding of how Einstein's achievement was such a colossal victory for truth. The method of Einstein's genius was something often referred to as thought experiments. In his most important thought experiments, he had deduced a number of things previously inaccurately explained by Newton and Maxwell, but perhaps this is not the best way of wording it. I shall discuss the four fundamental forces at a later time as well as Newton and Maxwell. Einstein discovered that gravity and acceleration are essentially the same thing. He explained why perception is different dependent on spatial location, where individuals are subject to gravity, and that the speed of light is perceived the same by observers where there is no gravity, i.e. in a vacuum. He mathematically provided evidence for the relationship between mass and energy, noted in his famous E=mc² equation. He postulated on the geometric causes of gravity being directly linked to the curvature of space-time, and he furthered the understanding of electromagnetism. In one of his early thought experiments, he began by imagining a man in the center of a three-dimensional box in a zero-gravity field. The man all of a sudden finds his feet touching the bottom of the box, and he is no longer at the center. There are two possibilities. Either the box has neared a planetoid and become subject to gravity, or the box has been pulled from its top and is now accelerating. Due to these experiments, he managed to uncover the nature of gravity and eventually formulate a series of mathematical equations to quantify the effects of gravity as well as the cause of it, space-time, to keep it at a simplistic level for now. These thought experiments are essentially a form of meditation, which is an intuitive right-brain practice based on the information that he already knew, which is logic, left-brain theory. This is an essential part of Hermetic practices, as I shall now explain. Alchemy is the art of transmuting lead and other base metals into gold, which is no secret and is widely known. However, as previously mentioned, all religious doctrine and scientific research prior to the reformation of science, i.e. when the scientific method and empirical system were reformed into their current format, though admittedly there were many reformations, which again I shall discuss at a later time, and are steeped in allegory. The true purpose of alchemy was to take a dull person of low mental aptitude and physical weakness and transmute them into a strong-willed, bodied and minded person. In order to achieve this, meditation is a must, in order to refine the qualities of the personality so that you can resolve the inadequacies and identify the strengths, as well as to develop a proper understanding of the work that is needed and in order to learn what was needed to make the necessary steps for achieving the desires of the soul. Essentially, it is for the purposes of balancing the mind for various purposes. This should be explained by the Hermetic principles later on. Meditation is essentially a thought experiment in which the practitioner silences the brain through focus on breathing. Then once relaxed and the primitive parts of the brain have been quietened, i.e. the R complex and the limbic system, then the neocortex can be used to optimize unhindered analysis of oneself, the circumstances in one's life, and the core desires of the soul. Greater clarity also leads to unbiased analysis of any external aspects of reality. So if you wanted to contemplate a particular theory, you may find answers that you would not find in a textbook, but also not require actual experience in the physical realm either. This is mostly due to the neocortex being synchronized in this state, so that the logical and creative functions are in sync, as are the emotional and intuitive aspects of the subhemispheres, leading to a supercomputer-esque perception or ability. The physical capabilities of the individual can also be vastly increased through greater mental control and stability, as many martial arts disciplines have explained for centuries. This will become clearer once I broach later topics and Hermetic principles later on. I should also point out that a healthy mind requires a healthy body, but that should be obvious. However, this too should be covered at a later date. Astrology is often replaced by the term psychology, which is a well understood field in today's society. Being paired with alchemy, astrology or psychology acts as a foundation for both dealing with other people and circumstance itself, another facet of developing external influence through internal processes. This is probably the least important of the three prongs of Hermeticism from my perspective, as alchemy allows us to know thyself, as Jesus Christ is said to have remarked. I personally would prefer to think that reading would be a better practice in today's world, as there is information on every field that has ever broached the human race, and psychology is no longer limited to the movement of the stars. However, astrology should not be ignored, which I'll explain in greater detail at a later time. As alchemy's main focus is the internal, astrology's focus is the external, and this should become more obvious once I explain the second Hermetic principle. And the final prime, geometry, is the unifier, as I will now explain. Geometry is often just perceived as a mathematical topic. The irony, of course, is that everything is based on mathematics. Geometry as such has been heralded as a purely left-brained logical study. This, however, is not the case. All life is based around two fundamental numbers, or rather ratios, pi and phi. For this reason, philosophy is the study of life. Phi has often been referred to as God's fingerprint, as it, like pi, is a number that can be deemed infinite in terms of decimal places. Looking at the human body as Leonardo da Vinci did, we can actually see the phi ratio in every aspect, but the same can be said for every living and non-living thing, indeed anything made of matter. It is even safe to say that even forces are subject to this ratio. For this reason, synchronization of the conscious, unmeditated mind can be done so through the practice of studying geometry, and it can even advance one's understanding of the world we live in, though I will explain in greater detail again at a later time. It is safe to say that the scientific fields, artists and musicians have all greatly benefited from the geometric principles, whether they have acknowledged this or not, as shape is based on geometric designs and proportions. Function is derived from form, as any biologist will tell you. The main aim of the Hermeticist is to create a balance between the mind, body and soul and all of the encompassing elements of these aspects, whilst also creating balance in the world. My personal goal, for example, is to balance the internal, or rather individual aspects of my being, as well as get a balance between maintaining the world and advancing the position of every living thing on the planet. The reason this works is that based on how we as individuals feel will dictate how we think and therefore our actions. Our heart, mind and guts, if you will. As such, my aim is to keep my emotions, feelings and desires in check at all times, so that I have balanced and well-meaning intentions in order to behave in a truly altruistic manner for the good of all and not just myself. As you should now be able to see, the Hermetic principles are very much of a positive and scientific, though often misconstrued as satanic by the religious and or pseudo-scientific by the scientific community, nature. Unless practiced in a selfish manner, in which they can only achieve positivity for the individual and damage society, which is the case as I shall explain in the following video. The key is to be both spiritual and scientific. I shall now discuss the 7 principles of Hermeticism in great detail and with my own personal descriptions and clues as to the meanings of each, but this isn't necessarily a complete guide and is very much specific to my perspective on how they should be applied and theorised on, without giving you every little detail. This was only supposed to be an introduction to the Hermetic principles after all. Mentalism. The universe is consciousness in many different forms, which we have come to call energy. High-grade energies are responsible for the very thing that we call life, and more importantly, existence of the mental attributes, whilst lower-grade energies allow the processes of non-conscious matter to interact with the surrounding environment, e.g. thermal and sound energies produced by the body, amongst other sources. These energies are all important in our continued perception of this existence, but they are in no means equal to the energy of pure consciousness itself. Studies into quantum mechanics have been proven that our observation impacts upon the very fundamentals of our reality. Consciousness drives the matter of the universe into changing its behaviour and interacting with it. The all in the one and the one in the all of the mind, which is where the idea of us all being a part of God comes from, the omnipresence and omniscience. All physical is determined by the mental, in the case of humans. When the internal and the external meet in the middle, through the process of self-reflection, the individual will behave in an altruistic manner of their own volition. This occurs due to the degradation of the ego. Fear and possessiveness leave, resulting in an intelligent, observational and self-controlled individual who has the characteristics required to flow from one situation to another, witnessing emotion, but devoid of the often associated negativity. Creative, intuitive, emotionally stable and genius-like in terms of intellectual capacity. We are all the same to a degree, it's just how we express our internal face on the external face, which defines how we are perceived by others in the external world. We all want the same base desires fulfilling, but we convey ourselves in very unique ways, resulting in either acceptance or rejection. Once this has been recognised, we can essentially be the best we can be. Meditation and self-reflection, self-improvement and selflessness are therefore paramount, as only by being our best can others see the true nature of our souls and thus see our beauty. Correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. The way the celestial bodies above you move centric to the Sun is equivocal to the way in which the electrons orbit the nucleus, i.e. protons and neutrons, of the atom. The way in which cells perform the functions of your body is the same way that the people cultivate, experiment and benefit off of the planet, and the atoms create the various machinations of the cell's contents, whilst the planet keeps the galaxy in the harmonious motion and space that it resides. If all things are fractal in nature, then to be the corrupting principle is paramount to being unnatural. This is true for humans at this present moment, in space-time. Humans are currently destroying the planet in addition to killing one another, though the latter is not particularly new. We are essentially just cavemen in suits, never having evolved far beyond our days in the caves, which is in turn going to have an effect on the entire universe in the grand scheme of things. You cannot prevent or change the global and beyond, but you can aid or change the local environment. As all things relate, it's just how well they relate that's important. It's also important to note that there is nothing new under the sun. With this in mind, certain aspects inherent within human personality can be expressed in both living and non-living entities external to the human. This is the basis of both the tarot, astrology, and various other traditions, including tribal rituals, particularly those where masks are adorned in order to take on the attributes of another being, for instance an animal or a deity of some kind. Vibration. Everything moves, nothing is stationary. When you are still, the electrons, negatively charged, and the protons, positively charged, are kept in orbit by the electronegative and attractive forces of strong nuclear, which is one of the four fundamental forces along with electromagnetism, weak intermolecular, and gravitational forces. This is due to the electrons wanting to keep an even spread of the available energies, whilst keeping an energetically feasible distance away from the proton-neutron complex, or nucleus. When your hand approaches a wall, for instance, the protons in both the hand and the wall repel each other greatly. This occurs simultaneously as the electrons also repel one another. As the protons and electrons in the hand get closer to the wall, they become more compact. This also occurs to the wall's atomic foundations. When the hand gets so close that you feel the wall, all you are really feeling is the increased pressure of the charges repelling or attracting one another. You become electromagnetically connected to an extent, but you never actually touch. With this in mind, the realization that reality is actually just a sea of energy transfers should become obvious. The electromagnetic effects are picked up by the nervous system as charged ions within the body allow the communication of stimulating charged ions within the wall to react, the resulting messages being sent to the brain via sensory neurons. I shall discuss bodily processes at a later time as well as entropy, which is the tendency of increasing disorder within the universe through thermodynamics. Rhythm. Whilst everything is in motion or waveform, it is also set at a specific harmonic or resonant frequency. The closer the frequency, or synchronous, if you will, the closer the waves get to imposition. If a wave imposes upon another, they become synchronized, resulting in an increase in either volume or dynamicity. When you meet people, the same can be said. If a disharmonious relationship occurs, it may mean that the individual's personality or state of mind is too different from the other individuals, resulting in potentially negative interaction, and the opposite can be said for harmonious relationships. All brainwaves follow an increase in magnitude in relation to increased capabilities when experiencing them. Gamma, or ultra-fast thinking, beta, fast thinking, alpha, resting, delta, meditative, and theta, deep sleep. We are 10% conscious when we are awake and 25% asleep, meaning we are more exposed to reality when we are actually asleep. Dolphins and whales, on the other hand, are speculated to be 25% conscious when asleep and 100% conscious when awake. I've always wondered why it is that they can be so peaceful, playful, and generally enjoy life, excluding of course the killer whale, which generally prefers to kill. One story which comes to mind involves the US Navy. At one point they attempted to use dolphins to detect submarines belonging to the Russians. However, they made their way to the Mariner's Trench after being released and found a way to remove the GPS systems that had been attached to them, presumably helping one another. This resulted in the devices following the strong currents of the trench whilst the dolphins divided and made their escape, while simultaneously the Navy tried to track them down, only to find that essentially the GPS systems had been removed. If you took every human who has ever lived, is currently alive, or ever will be, and joined hands with them, according to personality and perspective, there would be no overlaps. All of the similar people would also be close to one another, and the dissimilar people would be facing you, i.e. opposite. In theory, I personally believe that we are observers of the reality that was created and as such are all unique, but have the same underlying driving forces. That being said, I believe that we are all living to experience a different perspective, each having different talents and possibilities open to us, which I shall discuss free will and fate shortly. Polarity. Every atom has either a charge or is neutral. Everything has an equal and an opposite. The grey is the neutral, the black and the white the extremities. Even waves move in to and fro motions, one without the other is not possible. Duality, coincidenti oppositorum. Pretty self-explanatory. Cause and effect. Every action has a corresponding reaction. If one weighs up all of the possibilities that could stem from one action, they may perhaps be able to create their own reality or avoid someone else's. This comes at a cost though, as no change is immediate, and the quicker change occurs, the more chaotic the process. If an individual should seek for themselves, they will only find equivalence reciprocated. At birth, you have a very limited free will. This increases through childhood and then on into adolescence. At adulthood, we gain the most free will we will ever have. However, at all stages we are subject to fate, in the form of fatalistic constraints, which we have accumulated over the past. If we are to make the right choices in order to retain or reclaim our true free will and complete our true purpose, We will need to ascertain which possibilities are open to us at present, and then sequentially deduce which route will inevitably result in us achieving these long-term goals by putting the short-term requirements first that will lead us to the long-term goal. I should, however, point out that we are subject to reality, which is a consensus perception, and so there are many wills working for different ends, and the next video shall elaborate on this in much more detail. Gender. Everything boils down to male and female principles, the left and the right brains, the logical or emotional and the creative or intuitive, the lines and the curves which make up the dimensions. The polarity and duality of these two opposing forces is equivocal to the way in which the universe was initiated. When the union occurs, something is generated, whether it be a physical life, a brainchild, or achievement of thought, or the universe itself. Balance. So as I've covered more than I initially intended to in this video, it's rather a lot of information, I shall leave it there for now, though I will undoubtedly come back to this topic and elaborate on some of the more vague points once I have covered some other topics that I feel are more important. Feel free to comment and or subscribe, and remember, the truth is stranger than fiction. It is often uncomfortable or painful to realise, but only it can set you free.